Welcome to today's edition of the Sourdough Simpleton. I'm Mark Levy, the Simpleton, and if you've been here before, you know what we're doing, and if you haven't, well, sit along and relax and enjoy the ride. Today and tomorrow we're going to be making a delicious loaf of sourdough bread with no commercial yeast. So this is actually a 2-day process. I've said before that sourdough making often requires some time. This is a recipe that requires some time. So let's get started. To begin with, earlier today, I took my sourdough starter out of the refrigerator and I fed it. And it sat on the counter for a few hours until it was nice and active. I've taken some sourdough starter off into this cup. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to see if it's ready to use. Now, looking at it, you can see that it has a nice bubbly surface and certainly looks like it's active and very happy and joyful. But there's a way to test that. And the way to test it is to take a little bit of the sourdough on a spoon, and we're going to put it into water. The moment of truth comes when it hits the water, if it floats or if it sinks. And as you can see by the sourdough floating on the water, it floats. And because it floats, it means that it's full of air and it's ready to use. So now that we've established that the starter is ready to use, we're going to go ahead and build our beginning dough. And this is one which is going to start today and finish tomorrow. Let's see what we have here. Get rid of that. We have our starter. We have flour. And we have water. And believe it or not, that's all we need for this dough. So we're going to start off with our 3 ingredients. The water is lukewarm. It's at about 110 degrees or so. I'm using a meat thermometer to check the water, but you know, it's a thermometer, you can do that. So about 108 degrees or so. And that certainly is fine. We're going to put that into our bowl along with flour. Now this is not all of the flour. This is about 3 cups or about 362 grams of all-purpose, unbleached, plain flour. Then we have the water, which is 1.5 cups of water, which is, as we said, lukewarm at about 110 degrees. And then we have 227 grams or 1 cup of nice, healthy, active sourdough starter. And we're going to mix this together in this bowl for about a minute until it's all well mixed together. And then we'll see how this all looks. Because right now, if you can take a look at this with me, it's a disgusting mess. I mean, there's water, there's flour, there's sourdough starter. It's everywhere. So we're just going to mix it together a little bit. Using a spoon, nothing fancy, just to mix it together. Okay. Well, we've mixed it together now for about a minute, a little more than a minute. So what we have now is a batter, which looks fairly smooth and regular. It's not a dough. It's not smooth like a dough, but it's more like a batter right now. So we're going to let this sit now for about 4 hours at room temperature. We're going to cover it with some plastic wrap and put it on the counter and let it sit there for about 4 hours. After that, it goes into the refrigerator, but I'll be back to tell you about that in just a second. Okay, now you might ask the question, what's with all this waiting? We've mixed it up. We're going to wait for 4 hours with the dough on the counter and then put it into the refrigerator for another 12 or so hours. Why so long? What's going on? Well, first of all, please understand this recipe uses no commercial yeast, and sourdough just takes longer to rise by itself. It's not as potent a leavening agent as commercial yeast would be. But second of all, there's a process which goes on which is called autolyse. Now, autolyse has nothing to do with renting a car. It's spelled differently, in fact, and it's the process by which the sourdough does its magic. It takes time for it to break apart the enzymes and process everything to produce the wonderful texture and flavor that we experience in sourdough bread. Now, because this is flour and water and sourdough starter, it's kind of a cross between a levain, which is a sourdough starter processed ahead of time, and I'll show you some definitions on the screen, you'll see what I'm talking about, and autolyse itself. So it's kind of a half and half between those two. Nonetheless, this is going to work out beautifully, you'll see tomorrow, and the result will be a beautifully textured and tasty loaf. So enjoy yourself. This is a long process, but in the end, it's worth it. Now, let's see if our 4 hours has elapsed with the dough on the counter. Boy, that didn't seem like 4 hours at all, did it? Went by just like that. Well, it's been 4 hours. The dough has been sitting on the counter for the past 4 hours. Let's see how it looks at this point in time. We'll just pull back this little bit of plastic wrap. And as you can see, it's quite a bit different from the way it was. First of all, it's significantly increased in size. It's actively bubbling all over the surface. A very lively looking dough indeed. So at this point in time, we're going to cover it back up again. And this cover is loose. You know, some people, this is kind of clever, but certainly some people, to cover these bowls, use a disposable shower cap. Goes on nicely, goes around it, and gives some headroom to the dough as well. I don't have any, so I'm just using some plastic wrap, but maybe I'll put that on my list to get. This goes into the refrigerator, where it will sit for the next 12 or 14 hours, which means tomorrow morning. So I'll see you tomorrow morning with the next step in the baking of this wonderful loaf of sourdough bread. Well, our dough has been resting in the refrigerator for the past 12 hours or so. It's now the morning, and we're going to add some flour to it and start the dough process. Well, one question might be, why did we put the dough in the refrigerator overnight? Doesn't that just slow things down? Well, actually it does, and that's a good thing. You see, sourdough has, of course, the yeast, naturally occurring yeast, but there are also various bacteria, lactobacilli and the like, which are in the sourdough starter. When you put the dough in the refrigerator overnight, it may slow down a lot of these components' actions, but allows the sourdough to develop more of a sour taste. So that taste you're looking for, that soury taste you're looking for, is accentuated by an overnight refrigerator stay of the dough. Now, I say overnight because if it's in there for too long, like anything else in the refrigerator, it's going to pick up odors from other things that are in your fridge. So you don't want to do that. But 12 hours, 14 hours at the most, is long enough to be in the refrigerator. We'll then take it out and start to work it for today's processes. We take a look at this dough as it's been sitting in the refrigerator. It's nice and glistening, some nice bubble formation. It's very sticky, and that's going to tell me that it needs to have more flour added. So we're going to begin with this in the bowl, and we're going to add 241 grams of flour, which is about 2 cups, give or take. But once again, we always measure flour by weight here, to the 362 grams of flour that was in here originally. And we're going to also add our salt at this point in time. This is 2½ teaspoons, which is roughly 15 grams of salt. And once again, I use non-iodized salt because the iodine does seem to inhibit the growth of the microorganisms that cause the magic to happen. We're now just going to take and start to knead this a little bit in the bowl until we can get all this flour incorporated. And then once we have the flour incorporated into the dough, we can turn it out and do a little bit more kneading on the table. Now, one way that you want to knead this, I know it's hard to see from this angle, is to lift up one side of the dough and fold it back on itself. And I'll show you that a little bit closer when we turn it out. For right now, I'll do a quick knead in the bowl, and then we'll talk about it once it's on the table. So hang on a second. We'll do some video magic and let some time go by. It's been a few minutes, and now we've got the dough at least somewhat together. I'm going to take it out of the bowl and put it on my table. Now I'm using a Silpat baking mat actually to knead on. I like it on this table. It seems to give me a nice surface and does a good job. Certainly if you have a marble counter or a quartz counter, that's excellent. People use all kinds of countertops to knead on. I guess it's whatever you feel comfortable with, whatever the dough is handleable with. So, as I was describing, we take an end of this dough and we pick it up and we fold it back on itself. Then we rotate it, take an end, fold it back on itself, rotate it, fold it back on itself, rotate it, and fold it back on itself. And we're going to keep doing that for a while until this dough is nice and soft and pliable. We're not kneading it as you would knead a regular yeast dough, but rather trying to incorporate all of the material together. Interestingly, when you do this pull and fold, what you're in essence doing is taking the inside of the dough and bringing it outside, almost turning it inside out, if you will. And that's a way of getting the sourdough starter evenly distributed through all the flour, and the flour distributed through the mess, so that it all comes out together in the end. Now this is clearly a very shaggy looking dough. As you can see, the dough is still on the dry side. It's a bit rough, and it will mix further as we progress with the mixing, but it's going to take some time to come together fully. So we're going to continue to mix it for a little while, and then put it back in the bowl. After that, it's going to have some time to rise. It may take it as long as 4 or 5 hours to rise, depending on how active this starter is. And as it does that, it's going to incorporate more of the flour in and become much more like the dough that we're looking for. We're actually going to come back and check this dough in about an hour and see how it looks. And we'll talk about the ways to tell whether or not it's done yet. So I'm going to finish kneading this, put it back in the bowl, cover it, set it on the counter now in my 75-degree kitchen. Remember, the temperature to best proof sourdough is roughly room temperature, about 75 degrees, plus or minus a few degrees. Do not put this into a warm oven as you would a yeast dough. If you get it up around the temperature for yeast doughs, which is about 100 degrees, you will kill the sourdough and you will end up with a very flat bread indeed. So at this point, we have a nice little loaf, looks like that. We're going to put that back here in the bowl, cover it with our plastic wrap, and set it on the counter. We'll be back with you in about an hour, and we'll see how things are looking. See you then. Well, it's been about an hour since we last spoke, and the dough has been resting here on the table for the last hour. Let's take a look and see how it looks now. I think you can appreciate that it has risen a tad, and it's somewhat smoother than it was before. If I push into the dough, it leaves a nice little hole down there. Now we want to see how this gets more resilient as it goes on. So now we're going to take it out of the bowl and see how we can manipulate it to make it progress further. So once again, the one thing you're going to notice now is the dough is warmer. It sat for an hour out of the refrigerator. It certainly is warmer than it was, but it's not to room temperature yet. Getting it to room temperature really is vital to helping the sourdough to start the rise process. And that's one of the reasons why it's going to be sitting out for a couple of hours. Once again, we're doing that letter fold where you bring up and you fold it back. And you bring the dough up and then you fold it back. And you just keep doing this for a little while until the dough has a uniformity throughout it. You don't feel any lumps or bumps. And after we do this, we're going to return to the bowl for another hour. And at that time, we should start to see some more fermentation and some more rise. Now, one of the things that you do with this process is actually deflate it somewhat, take some air out of it, so that it's smaller than when we first took it out of the bowl. But that's okay, because this dough has a way to go yet. It's only been an hour. It's going to be a good part of the second day before we can take it out of the oven. And then we're going to want it to cool down before we enjoy it. So it's delayed gratification all the way around with sourdough. Now, you can't just knead it up, pop it in the oven, and enjoy it. You really have to wait a little while and give it a chance to mature. So, we'll be back to see you in about an hour. And you can see about how big the dough is now. And we're going to put it back in its bowl, and we'll see you in an hour after another wait, and we'll see how it's looking. Welcome back. It's been another hour. Let's see how things are looking. So, we can compare this dough with what it was an hour ago. And here's what it looked like when we finished our first hour and kneaded it and put it in the bowl. And now this is how it looks now. So you can see that it's bigger. It is getting softer. And it's time to knead this one. So once again, we're going to empty that out. And the dough is getting much more pliable. We can pull it now. Although when you pull it, it does kind of still get shaggy. So it's not yet to the point where we want it. But it's clearly a lot better than it was. So once again, we'll keep this interlude short this time because it's going to be the same thing. We're going to do the fold over kneading and deflation of this dough. And then we're going to put it back in the bowl to rest for another hour, and we'll come back at that point in time. So it's a process, and we're working through it together. We'll see you then. So now it's the end of the second hour, and let's see what we have here. First of all, look at our dough. Shows that it has risen even further from where it was an hour ago, and it's now significantly larger, and it is getting a little more soft. We're going to turn it out here onto a lightly floured surface. Again, I use a Silpat mat because I like to, but you can use whatever kind of a counter surface you like. And the dough is a lot more resilient now. Has a nice feel to it. Almost spread it out if I want to. And you'll notice that we can pull it up much better than we could before. It was breaking before if I tried to pull it up much, but now I can grab a hold of it and give it a yank and it pulls up nicely. And that's a sign that the gluten is developing and that it's becoming closer to being ready to go through our finishing steps. We're not quite there yet. I think another hour might do it, but we can do this after 3 hours instead of after 5 hours. Hey, I'm all for that. Our room is, of course, is at 75 degrees. I've said that before, which is the right temperature for rising sourdough. And we're just going to deflate this a little bit down pull it up a little bit. I know this is boring to watch, but it's fun to do. And the one thing that you really can't appreciate, one of the things you can't appreciate, is this dough feels different. It feels more softer, more gentle, if you will, than it did before. As the gluten forms and the dough just gets closer to what we really want to have it. So this is where we are now at the end of 2 hours. We'll put it back into the bowl to rest for another hour. I'll be anxious to see where we are at the end of 3 hours. I have to wait, but you don't, because here it comes. Gee, time goes fast. It's now been 4 hours. Let's have a look and see how the dough looks. So compared to how it looked an hour ago, it's bigger, it's smoother, it's fluffier, and it's softer. So I think it's about time that we take it out and maybe do something else with it. Once again, we have a lightly floured surface that we're going to turn this dough out on. There it comes. And this dough is now very light and airy looking. You can stretch it. This is called a window pane test. We're going to do this maybe another time to show you a little bit closer, but it means I can stretch this dough out very, very thin, be able to look at it. And that means this dough is ready to go. So we're going to just take it together. Very gently, I'm going to cut this in half with a bench scraper. Not exactly in half, but it's close. I think one's bigger than the other, or maybe one's smaller than the other. I'm not really sure which. We will do a little bit of stretching to form these into rounds. Pull the ends together. Get a nice little round that way. And take this one, do the exact same thing with it. Give it a little twist, give it a little pull, give it a little pull, give it a little pull, shape it together. Make a nice little round. Yeah, one's clearly bigger than the other one. But you know what? It'll still taste delicious. Now, I will work a little bit of TV magic for a second and change my setup. Watch this. So now we have a tray to put our rounds onto, and this is just a standard half-sheet tray with a piece of parchment paper on it. We'll put one there. We'll put the other one there. Give them some room to spread out a little bit because they're going to spread as they rise. We're going to cover this with plastic wrap loosely, but I'm going to take the plastic wrap, put just a little bit of oil spray on it to prevent it from sticking to the bread as it rises. And now this bread will rise for the next couple of hours, and we'll peek at it an hour or two. And when it looks nice and risen and a little bit bubbly and soft, it'll be time to bake it. So we'll be back with you at that point in time. I'll let you know how long it takes. We'll be back then. Different. It's been about 2.5 hours and these loaves have been rising. Let's see how they look. Now, if we recall, this is how they looked when we started out about 2.5 hours ago. And now taking a look at them, they're significantly larger, they are softer, and really good looking loaves. So here's what we're going to do. First thing we're going to do is brush them with some water. You can also spray them. If you have a sprayer, that works very well. I don't have a sprayer, as I mentioned before. I'll put it on the list of things I'm going to have to get one day. But for right now, and you'll notice that as I put the water on, these loaves are very soft and kind of jiggling back and forth because they're full of air. The water is going to help to give it a nice crust. Okay. And then we have to slash it to allow the crust to expand. And again, we use a bread knife to do that. There's a tool called a lame, which is a razor blade knife. Works very well also. I don't have one. I know a list of things to do. I'm now going to put this into the oven at 425 degrees for about a half an hour. And then we'll let it bake, and we'll see how it looks when it comes out. So we'll see you in about half an hour after these bake. Well, it's been close to a half an hour now, and we're just getting ready to take the sourdough out of the oven. Once again, this is the extra tangy sourdough bread recipe from the King Arthur baking website. It's taken us a little bit more than a day. We put this up yesterday at about noon, and it's now 4 o'clock in the afternoon the next day, so it's taken quite a while. This is, as I said, quite a commitment of time, and the result should be 2 absolutely delicious loaves of bread, but you can't eat them when they come out of the oven. Really, sourdough has to rest for a while and cool down before you can enjoy it. So when you do take your sourdough out of the oven, let it rest. There's the beeper. Let's see how it looks. What do you think? Yummy, huh? So we're going to take these out. Put them on a cooling rack. We'll let them cool thoroughly before we enjoy them. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Sourdough Simpleton. I'm Mark Levy, the Simpleton, and today's recipe was a tangy loaf of sourdough bread from the King Arthur baking website cookbook. We'll have more next time. Please do subscribe to this Facebook page and subscribe to the YouTube channel, and let me hear from you. You can email me at marc, at sourdoughsimpleton.com, or leave a message on the Facebook page. We look forward to seeing you next time with more good eats and good things to have fun with from the Sourdough Simpleton. That's all for now.